Welcome to our event today, Building Communication Success for Autistic Children with Proloquo. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia, which for us today are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to recognise their continuing connection to the land, sea, waterways and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to their elders past and present. I'm Craig Smith, Manager of Technology and Innovation at Positive Partnerships, and I'm joined here today with the developers of Proloquo at AssistiveWare, Erin and David, who I'll invite to introduce themselves now. Erin.
Hi, my name's Erin. I am the Director of Learning Design at AssistiveWare, which just means I'm really responsible for thinking about how our products support teaching and learning. And then the other big role I bring to this is I am the mother of two adult children who are both diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So both extraordinarily different individuals from each other, but one of them is non-speaking and has complex needs. So that's what brought me into this field.
I'm David. I'm the founder and CEO of AssistiveWare, and I originally came into this field because I wanted to help a friend who'd broken his neck during a car accident, and that is now over 25 years ago.
Thank you, David. Now, the title of this session is focused on Proloquo, but could you tell us what is the future for Proloquo to go?
Great question. So Proloquo to Go came out in 2009, so over 15 years ago. And over the last 15 years, we've learned a lot. And we wanted to take the things we've learned and create something that was even better. What we ran into is that we have about a couple of hundreds of thousands of users of Proloquo to Go. So we didn't really want to disrupt them, but we also wanted to be able to innovate. So we decided to start from scratch, build an entirely new product, and that became Proloquo. We continue to work on both of those products. With Proloquo to Go, we'll make changes that are not too disruptive. And with Proloquo, we really have the space to really innovate in terms of what AAC looks like and how you experience it. So we'll continue to work on both of those.
Fantastic. That's great to know. Now, Erin, what are some of the most common misconceptions about non-speaking autistic individuals, and how does AAC help reshape these misunderstandings?
That's a big question. I think the most important thing to think about is what we see in our non-speaking autistic individuals is things like a need to feel safe in their bodies in any environment they're in, and to not feel that the space they're in is an assault on their senses, right? That it's not so noisy and so bright, or that there's just not too much chaos in their system, right? We see a real need for authenticity, for people to say what they mean and mean what they say and to speak it clearly. We see, a need for movement and a respect for movement, or a respect for what you need to do with your body in a space to be able to engage and learn. All of these things, the biggest misconception is that only our non-speaking autistic kids need them. And when I go into every single general education space or regular education classroom I go into, I see that need in every single one of the kids, but it's our autistic kids who make it a problem that needs to be solved rather than a problem that's usually ignored. So I think the biggest misconception is that these aren't actually universal needs, and the very best classrooms I've ever been in and the best educators I've ever watched are folks who have supported lots of people with autism and have now made that universal. You know, the best teachers, they've taught lots of students with autism, and now they're taking everything they learned from those kids and using it with all children. Whether it's visual supports, whether it's tone of voice, whether it's the clarity of their communication, all of that. So yeah, so to me, that's the biggest issue. And when we bring AAC into the picture, what that also does is make sure that not only are we providing lots of visual supports, which will kind of show an idea of what that can look like with AAC, but we're slowing down. We're being very concrete in our language. As soon as we start using AAC, we can't just have that, blah, 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 blah flow of speech that is just can be so rapid, right? We're taking our time, we're being more intentional, and we're creating so much more space for the other person to contribute. And then the other thing I think we do is that as soon as we have an AAC device and I'm looking at it in order to construct my message, I'm doing things like reducing the demand for eye contact. We have now a third thing that together we're looking at, and where together we're constructing meaning, and together we're thinking about what it is that we want to communicate and think about. And I think that's powerful for everyone, but it particularly creates space for our folks who are just very neurodivergent.
I love that idea that it's not only addressing the misconceptions about autistic learners and communicators that you've mentioned there, but it's actually creating a universal space where you are modelling those really effective communication practices across the whole class. And like you've said too, with using the AAC device as part of that communication experience, you are modelling and thinking about good language practices as well. Would you say there's spaces in which then for families and educators, their perceptions of what their children and young people are capable of are expanding as well through the use of AAC?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things. I think that if we're really fluent in our speech, we expect that speech is just a really easy thing to do. And often what we're looking for in speaking young children is that they'll just simply imitate what we say. As soon as we start trying to communicate with an AAC system, that imitation looks different, that engagement looks different, that curiosity looks different. And now we have a much more level playing field. You know, we don't know where all the words are. We're learning it too, so we're learning it together. And now we're not getting to rely on these things that come so effortlessly to us. We are together figuring this out and navigating it through. And we're creating a physical space. This space between us is now where together we are looking at visuals and constructing meaning and figuring out what we're gonna share with each other.
So we know with Proloquo, it offers a unique thinking space feature. Could you tell us how this specifically supports early communicators in developing their language skills?
Oh yeah, this is one of my favorite things. Okay, so what you're seeing now is our Proloquo app, and on the surface, it looks a lot like any kind of traditional communication system. You'll see, you know, the different parts of speech, like your pronouns, your verbs, your describing words, and then different categories of things you can talk about. And in a traditional AAC system, you're constructing a message, you know, word by word. So I can say, I want to go to the, and then I'm going to go to my places, and I'm going to choose a place. We're in Australia, so maybe it's the beach, right? So that's a traditional system, and so you can see that sentence structure really matters, right? And the sentence structure of that message window is that of traditional speech, which means that for our kids who are learning language through their device and who are learning to now use this to communicate, it takes a while for any kid to get to a place that they can construct this kind of sentence word for word. So what thinking space lets us do is now be spatial. So I can move these things around, and I'm going to go ahead and clear it. And maybe what I'm going to say to my child is, you know, we should go somewhere this weekend. So where do we want to go? You know, let's look at our places. We could go to the park. We could go to the beach. We could go to the swimming pool, right? Now I've created a space where it's not just a message that I've generated, but it's actually a brainstorm, and it's a conversation that we're having together. So that's really the kind of thing that thinking space was intended to help us do. If I do something like, you know, I could just be having a conversation with my child about, you know, what you like, and what do you not like. And it could be as simple as going into their food words and talking about snacks and saying, you know, muesli bars, popcorn. We can sort them. And now I can have a conversation, say, well, when we go to the grocery store this weekend, we need to make sure that we get your muesli bars, because you've shown me how much you like it. And you've shown me you don't like popcorn, so I'm going to stop doing that. if they're not yet using the space, I can say, oh, it really seems like you really like muesli bars. Like you get excited when you see them. So I think you like them, right? And we can just attribute that meaning and just show how if we move muesli bars over next to like, you know, that's one way that we communicate. So we can communicate spatially. And we know that infants are born already knowing it's a basic cognitive bias that if two things are close together, that they're associated, and if we move things apart, they're separate. So that's what I mean by we're using this spatial thing where actually kids can now just reach out and touch and move things around and explore that spatial thing to help them communicate, and that can be the scaffold to speech. And I think the more to communication, and I think the more they do that, the more that it really gives that feedback to adults that language is developing, communication is developing, and everyone raises their expectations.
I love the idea of it being a spatial way of expressing and thinking, because it does turn it into this imaginative canvas, doesn't it, where students are, and like you said, that look at connection between images and concepts. It's quite a different way of using an AAC device and using Proloquo from the sentence construction standpoint. How do you teach that? What would be ways to model or use that in, say, a classroom environment?
One of the things I would make sure that we're doing is always co-constructing, right? It's really easy for adults for us to think about, I know I'm going into a therapy session or I'm going into a classroom or I'm going to have a conversation with my child, and to go sit back and privately go, okay, what are the choices I want to give them? And I think what's so essential when you're using something like our thinking space is co-construct it together. Partly you're slowing the speed at which we're throwing ideas out, but we're just thinking about, I want to go somewhere. What are the different places that we could go? What am I thinking about with that? Oh, here, let's go to places, and searching that sort of thing. Or, I'm feeling hungry. Where would those words be? They're going to be here in food. So using those think alouds and showing kids what we're thinking about as we go there.
Yeah, nice. That co-construction element as a way of modelling and really being part of the teaching experience. Yeah. No, I love that. And we know that Proloquo is built to grow alongside users from childhood through adulthood. How do you ensure the app remains relevant and empowering as an individual's communication needs evolve and change over time?
Well, so that was a huge part of the planning that went into Proloquo, was making sure. So, for example, some of the first things that kids communicate, little kids, is the things that they want or like, right? Different foods, different animals, different characters. So we can go into animals, and maybe my favorite animal is a frog. And so as a small child, I'm talking about why I like frogs, and now we can talk about, well, what do we know about frogs? What colors are they? They're generally green and brown. So I can talk about the colors. Brown. I can talk about where they live. And we'll go into, say, nature and talk about water and lakes, that sort of thing, right? I can talk about, just like me, they eat, and what do they eat, all that sort of thing. And then over time, so now I'm in school, and now we're studying frogs. So I will go back and I'll talk about the fact that there's reptiles, amphibians, and a frog is an amphibian. And now I have all these examples, these visual supports in front of me to help me think about what is a reptile, what is an amphibian. And so now, what is it that frogs eat? Well, if we go back to our animals, they probably eat invertebrates. So what's an invertebrate? That's a big word. That's a complex word. But here we've got a whole big example. We can talk about it. And then as I move through the grades and I'm going into, we're learning about habitats. So now it's not just that that a frog lives near water, but what is its habitat? And the fact that it's aquatic. And go from there, right? And we can keep going. We can now go into the food chain and talk about the fact that a frog, is it a prey or is it a predator, right? Is it an omnivore or is it a carnivore? And the thing about Proloquo is you've got the words, you've already got the visuals, you've already got the words to take all of these things through. And then as we go even further into the lifespan, when we're talking about, for example, the things we like, the things that we don't like.
Not like.
I can now do things like start evaluating my teachers. I can start evaluating my support staff. My daughter receives support with personal care, so we actually go into the care folder and talk about what do you not like and not like about how I help you get dressed
Dress.
or undressed,
Undress.
how I wash your hair, how I brush your teeth. That's a big issue with her, right? So that's how it just kind of keeps growing, that we can just keep talking about such a range of topics.
So fantastic seeing that in real time, to go from those really early foundational concepts of language and then to build up through this architecture of like evolving understanding of what those words mean, and like to step through the school curriculum, but also the lived experience space as well, and that sort of real functional use. It's very interesting to see how that grows. David, what insights from autistic individuals themselves have shaped the latest developments in Proloquo?
So already for a very long time we've had a lot of contacts within the adult AAC community. And that includes obviously also autistic adults. And the other thing is we have started actually hiring people that are autistic. We have part-time AAC users on our team, and they're involved in things like research. They're involved in some of the development work, some of the design work. And so that's one side of it. The other side is that when we started working on Proloquo, we decided that we needed to get a better understanding of what is it that AAC users really need in terms of words. So we started collecting anonymous language use data, including from Proloquo for Text, which is an app for literate AAC users. And that data, which obviously was only for those people who consented, gave us insight in what the words are that actual adult AAC users use and need. And that really helped us inform some of our design decisions. And maybe Erin wants to expand a bit on that.
Yeah, so it was absolutely fascinating to see the words that someone who can spell and type was communicating, and then asking how do we help someone who's using symbols instead to actually have those same words, and what were the words that our non-speaking adults who were typing were saying more than speaking people were saying. And so, for example, one of the things we found, if I go back to care, the word privacy and private was more important to our adult AAC users than it was in the speaking population, which that told us we really needed to make sure that our kids learning language had access to a word like that. But there was so much we learned. We learned, for example, that words like wanna and gonna were just as important and were used just as commonly as want and go. So we figured out how we could add them in. So one of the features of Proloquo is we have something called related words. So if I select a word like want, you'll see this column appears down the side, which lists related words. Down at the bottom, you're going to see wanna, because that just came up so often in the data. But it's not just that we want things, we might crave them, we might desire them, we might dream for them or hope for them. So now you can change your message. You can say, do you want chocolate or do you crave chocolate? And what we're doing there is a few things. We're helping our symbol-based users, our kids who are learning to touch these pictures, we're helping them start to have that bridge towards when they could one day use literacy, when they could use letters to spell or recognize whole words. So we're really expanding their vocabulary. But it's also getting to what you raised earlier about how it's changing expectations of adults around them. Because the child who says want chocolate, want chocolate, want chocolate is going to get a pretty predictable response of no, you can't have it right now. But if I say crave chocolate, all of a sudden that changes the dynamic and it changes how everyone perceives them. And so that was all insights from adult users of how could we get that same rich vocabulary they had and bring it to our kids. And then some of the other things we found was, if I go back to pronouns, our data was showing that our text-based users, people who could type, were saying things like majesty and highness. Right? So it made us think about how often you might say to your child, yes, your majesty, I'll get you some chocolate, right? Well, so then we asked, where would we put words like majesty and highness in a system? So we've put them under pronouns so that our kids can be just as snarky and we can be just as snarky with our kids as we'd be with speaking people. So it was all that kind of thing. And then I think the other thing that was so powerful was just seeing such a broad range of words being used by our adult users. And that told us that, we had already known that topics like vehicles and animals and bodies, that's going to be important to everyone. But, for example, the number of words we found around gaming and different characters. And so making sure that our kids had access to words like,
dragon,
and unicorn, but also notice dragon has related words like leviathan and basilisk, because basilisk, right? If you can't read Harry Potter and not talk about a basilisk. We consulted adult users to help us figure out what's the difference between an ogre and a troll, because that was coming through in their word usage data that this stuff matters. So all of that kind of thing. And then some of the feedback, the vocabulary was reviewed multiple times by adult users who, for example, just looking at the folders of different topics, they're the ones who said, you need a separate gaming folder from toys. It's not a form of play, right? And so helped us think about words like that. So all through the whole vocabulary, everything from the different jobs and words you need at work to just all the imaginative words that we can use, all of that, we were really inspired by adult users.
That's fantastic, because it's sort of a known thing that language evolves over time. We know that language never stops. What you're saying too is that through the input of autistic adults or adults who are communicating and everyone else, you're actually feeding that evolution of language into Proloquo, so the vocabulary there stays rich and relevant to what people are wanting to use. But I love too the subtleties of things like that conversation about, well, where should your majesty go? When it's not a conversation about royalty, it's a conversation about a funny little thing to say to your child, yes, your majesty, I'll get the chocolate for you. And also that difference between crave and want for chocolate completely changes the context and the tone of what people are expecting and responding with as well. So you've talked about the input into that, I guess, co-understanding of the user experience. Do you find that the input from your users has also helped to understand how to teach the use of Proloquo or in an educational context? Could you say anything about that?
Yeah, I would say, so our field for the last 10 or 15 years has told parents and teachers every minute of the day, you need to, when you go to speak, you need to model the use of the communication device. And we know that's incredibly difficult. I know as a mom, that's what I'm supposed to do. I know it's not what I've been able to actually pull off in practice. So we know that we need to do this, but simply telling people to do it when teachers are some of the most intense multitaskers I know, and the only people I know who multitask as much as a classroom teacher would be parents of kids with disabilities, right? So we're asking people who are incredibly busy to do something difficult. So one of the things that we tried to do was think, what was it that we as parents and educators are trying to say to the folks that we're supporting, to the children we're raising, to the students in our classroom? What are we trying to say? How could we help you be more effective communicating what you need to communicate? And oh, by the way, you're also modeling the device when you do, so that children are looking to you, they're seeing a demonstration, and we're actually teaching the device while you're meeting your own need to communicate. And now it's not just some extra thing you're supposed to do on top. So every time I navigate the system, every time I go in to find a topic to talk about, our adult users were using a lot of words about exclusion and inclusion and respect and power and control. These are important words, right? Just going to say those words, I've just given you some instruction on how to go say those words yourself. And now when I do something like go into the thinking space, I can make that more explicit, and now you get to explore those words before you can even use them.
We know that in Australian classrooms there's a strong push for inclusive education. How does Proloquo support teachers in creating those genuinely inclusive learning environments? And you talked a little bit to it earlier about the universality of some of the concepts and the way this communication works, but could you just say a bit more about that inclusive learning space?
Yeah. So one of the first things we did when we created all these topic folders was we looked at the curriculums of Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, United States, and Canada. And obviously we found massive commonality. We wanted to put all those essential academic words into the system so that teachers would have those as supports, so that they don't now have to go and try to prepare all these separate visuals, but we could give it to them. So we put them there for that. And then we thought a lot about, if you're actually using this, if we can get devices into hands of kids and they can explore this too. And some of the fascinating things we've learned is that when we can do that, when teachers are teaching with these visuals, and when our students have access to them, we see that our English language learners now have a visual support to access the dominant language of the classroom, right? And if we're, let's say, I'll go back to society, and we're trying to teach concepts like control and rights and protest, I've now got visuals for it. That's going to help my English language learners as much as my kids on the spectrum or with other disabilities. They've also got, if I go to, a word like include, they've got all of these related words, and notice that there is absolute acoustic consistency in how the word is pronounced. So now they've got that, they can actually hear words being spoken over and over again, and we see kids where schools are using this actually practicing their English, trying to match the acoustics of the voice output. So that's our English language learners. We've got, kids who don't have a lot of experience with success, kids with those really common challenges in a classroom like ADHD, executive functioning, kids who might really struggle, learning disabilities where they might really struggle with word retrieval. Now they don't have to try to retrieve those words. They've got these visual supports that help give them an idea of words to say. If you put me on the spot and ask me to name invertebrates, I would probably struggle. If you instead say, go and select some invertebrates that do this, I've got these visual supports to go through, and I can really easily picture them. So we're just providing that support for all kinds of kids who struggle to answer questions or name things on the spot, that sort of thing. So that would be my vision of how this can support inclusion, is it helps the teacher be more clear. Like, I was listening to a teacher give a lecture where she was talking about the Oregon Trail. And so this is westward expansion in the United States, and the settlers rode wagons down the Oregon Trail. If she had been using the symbols in Proloquo, she would have realized that if we go to vehicles, that the concept of wagon that most kids had in their mind was probably something they could pull behind them, and that a trail was something they could walk. And if she'd had that visual in front of her, I think she would have realized that she was teaching a concept that she actually hadn't pre-taught enough to know that she was talking about the same thing her kids were thinking about, and it would have brought them together. So having these visuals, make sure everybody's talking about the same thing, and then we're creating all of these on-ramps for all the kids in the classroom to engage in the ideas.
I love that. And I think you spoke to it too, Erin, that it's broader than just the autistic student conversation. You've talked about ADHD, talked about the executive functioning conversation. It's even broader than even maybe what we think of as the traditional neurodivergent space,
Yes.
and going into just all different ways that students think about language, think about connections. And like you said, in that example of the teacher, it makes you think a little bit more about, what am I pre-teaching? How am I scaffolding these concepts as part of my teaching? And how does Proloquo fit into that space as well? Now, David, everyone is talking about artificial intelligence these days, AI. Some AAC apps are already adopting some AI features. What's your take on this trend?
Yeah, so we definitely see a lot of interest within the field in AI. And there are definitely applications where we think it's really valuable. For example, if you have a progressive disease, you're an adult, you've developed full literacy, AI can potentially speed up your communication. There has been some research done already on this with adult users, and one of the things they found is that adults were struggling with the fact that keeping that tone of voice that you would like to have, that's like your tone of voice, that the AI was not really helping there. So it became a trade-off between having a way to communicate a little faster, especially if you have, for example, physical disability and the access is a problem, and being you, being the as funny or as serious as you want to be. So that's one part of it. But another area is around privacy. Most AI today is online. That means every single thing you say goes on to the internet. And we know that companies may promise that they won't do anything with that, but we also know that they apologize every once in a while because something went wrong. So, and if this is your way to communicate, you might use your AAC in the bedroom. You might use it when, talking about a serious problem at work. And if you have those conversations, it's not sure that you really want all that text to go online and be processed there to then give you faster access to something. There is another issue also. Many AAC users struggle with being accepted in terms of that their communication is accepted as theirs. When you cannot speak and you use a system to communicate, and people know that the system speeds up things, that it uses AI, then the question becomes, whose communication is this? Is this the legitimate, authentic communication of that person? Do they have the cognitive capability to form that complex, powerful sentence? Or is it just a device that's talking? And given the fact that there are already people who are challenging whether, if someone cannot speak and now they're using their AC, is that really what they want to say? Is it their language level? Does it reflect their understanding of the world? Introducing AI into that is likely to just make matters a lot worse. So those are some, kind of general things. But when we think about our user community, the biggest part of our user community is not the adults who are fully literate. It's those people who are still developing language, whether they're young children or whether they get access to AAC at a later age. And then suddenly AI has a lot further implications, and I'm sure Erin can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is making sure that we are creating ways for children to truly learn language word by word, making all the same mistakes in their language that speaking kids get to make. So, for example, my speaking kid would say things like, "I runned so fast," and that told me what they were learning about grammar. I get concerned about all of these technologies that are trying to make words so easily available to our kids that I'm not sure it really is their message, and it doesn't even allow them to make the kinds of errors that allow them to get the feedback to truly grow their language, right? So I don't want something that magically populates a whole sentence when I'm trying to teach sentence construction to a student, right? And when I'm trying to teach sentence expansion, the idea that we're just going to give you a bunch of options and you're going to choose one, I don't know how you're going to learn that without that opportunity to really practice and rehearse. So I can really see the role for AI for our adult users who want to quickly and efficiently, they know exactly what they want to say. I get nervous when I think of it being used in a school setting in place of instruction.
Yeah, and that makes sense because at that point, it's almost like, well, how much is the device doing the communicating for the child, or the young person or the adult, and how much is the young person themselves actually involved in the thought and construction of language? And like you said, you don't want the technology to smooth out everything so it's a flawless expected experience that, oh, I'm going to have the device bring the language out for me. Because like you said, you need to fall, you need to learn those mistakes, and that's actually where the construction process comes from. So if that's all being, and to your point, David, too, it's like, well, who is doing the communicating here? Is the communication from the dominant algorithm that's fueling this, or is it actually the human-centered approach that's coming through as well? So that's, I guess, that's going to be the interesting conversation to keep seeing there. Did you want to expand upon anything there, David?
I'd love to expand a little bit on that. So one of the problems then is also if the AI is doing part of the sentence construction, and if you're still learning language, you probably don't have the capability to figure out if the message that's going out is actually the message you want to share. And we see that a lot of AAC users, they already struggle with people interpreting what they might be wanting to say. Now, if they have no way to actually, because there's also the comprehension side. So kids that are, struggling to communicate with their speech, they often also are, behind in terms of their receptive language, in terms of understanding the language. So that means if there are like 5 perfect choices, perfectly formulated choices provided by the AI, and I don't yet have the ability to make choices there because I may not be able to, read the suggestions that well, I may not be able to fully understand those suggestions. At that point, I'm going to make choices and I might actually miscommunicate. And the whole idea behind AAC is that it helps you clarify your communication, that it helps you expand your communication. And also as we think towards, going towards literacy, because ultimately we want everyone to be able to say exactly what they want. If the system has been automatically doing things for you, then it takes away that opportunity to learn those things, which means that if you are like 5 years later being taught grammar, and you've never actually used it in practice because the system all did it for you, then that's going to be a problem. It's going to be much harder for you to learn it at a later stage. So there's those kind of things that can really affect how this works out. And it's not just AI. For a long time there have been products that do things automatically. Like I choose I and then is changes automatically to M. That's great if it's all about efficiency, but it's not so great if it's about learning to communicate, developing language. Another example we often see is systems where you might choose eat and then it jumps right into your food. You might have wanted to say something totally different. And so AI is just kind of expanding that. And we see, serious risks, especially for the population we serve there.
We are working in a field, the AAC field, the special education space, the speech therapy space, where our past history is we're often satisfied with something that looks like communication as opposed to authentic communication. And, getting to what I said at the beginning, like, when we think about what our kids, our non-speaking kids need, they need us to say what we mean and mean what we say, and they need authentic. I can so imagine an AI-based AAC system that when you say, how are you, it automatically populates, good, how are you? That's not what the world needs more of. We need more of not good. I'm struggling, right? We need to actually be having our autistic kids help us realize how much of this meaningless communication that we have is undermining connection, undermining relationships, undermining our mental health, and actually start being more honest and not just giving these trite, rote answers, right? So so that's my concern, is that we could be quite satisfied with something where, my polite phrases are just automatically put in front of me, and now I'm being even more isolated and even more silenced. And I think our speaking kids can be as silenced by that as our non-speaking kids.
I think that's a great point, because we probably know from the last couple of years of AI development and experience that there can be a tendency for some of the software to be always overly positive and everything's perfect and let's all be very happy about our responses. And what you're saying is if that comes to dominate too much of how the communicator is supported, they'll be funneled potentially into particular pathways of response that don't actually reflect how they feel, because you want them to be very, authentic and have that agency themselves. I think something, David, you mentioned too, it's not necessarily, I mean, when we talk about AI, you think that's a very expansive conversation. It's also just software that tries to anticipate too much of what a user wants to say that can be a pitfall. Did you want to expand upon some of that too?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things to think about is what are those models trained with? And what we found as we were doing our research to design the vocabulary in Proloquo, we looked at data from speaking people, we looked at data from writing, we looked at data from actual AC users. And we found those differences. Now, those models are being trained on written text very often, on spoken text, but not necessarily on communication by AC users. And similarly, the likelihood that those models are being trained on a lot of language generated by people who are neurodiverse versus who are not, those things are really going to affect the models, and the likelihood that that will lead to more authentic communication is even less so. So that's a big challenge, I think, as well.
You've both just been at the Agoski conference in South Australia this past week on that sort of speech therapy focus, looking at communication. Were there any trends, were there any research or things that you sort of observed there and thought this is quite interesting for this space?
We were doing sessions on vocabulary instruction, and I just loved the rich conversations and interest around vocabulary instruction. So I know that doesn't sound like the most wildly exciting thing, but really it's that thing that gets us from I want to I crave, right? Or that gets us from, a frog lives in a marsh to a frog lives in a riparian habitat. Assuming I'm saying that right. So I found that really exciting because I think what breaks my heart most for my 21-year-old who's non-speaking is that I don't think she has yet to experience the true joy of language and being able to find that one word. I'm not just curious, I'm intrigued, right? That one word that really gets to convey exactly how she feels. So she's still learning this technology. I mean, to me, one of the most rewarding parts of building this technology was thinking about what I wish had been in place for her when she was a young child. So seeing so much interest and excitement and energy around how do we get out of that old school thinking that if you've got disabilities and you use symbols to communicate, you're going to have a very small number of words, and we're just going to help you learn how to use those frequently. But really, how are we going to expand the words that someone has available to them? I was really excited by that. And also, it was so exciting to see so many examples of how people were already using our products.
Oh, wow.
So that was wild.
Do any come to mind that you can think that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so a teacher shared, so this is an image of a thinking space that she did because just before Agoski, the cyclone hit the Gold Coast. So what she shared was she had, the students had been taken into a specific classroom as they were all preparing to go home early. And one teacher was already there kind of, madly on the internet trying to pull down images to help explain to kids what was happening and what to predict during a cyclone. And she said the energy in this space was just very anxious. And she didn't need to pull down images. She just got out her Proloquo, projected the thinking space, and then you'll see here what she co-constructed with her kids. So they talked about before the cyclone, what's happening there, what's the fact that animals are safe, that we listen to the news, food and water. And then during the cyclone, what to expect. We'll stay inside, it will be loud, there will be rain and wind and no school. And then after the cyclone, it will be finished. There will probably be no TV. Trees will be down, might flood, but we'll still be safe, and we'll clean up. So she said it just brought the whole energy of the space down. The kids were coming and moving things from one area to another, and they were just able to have a discussion about something very scary and very abstract that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to have. So that was one that was just really cool.
That's fantastic, and that really speaks to the value of that thinking space in Proloquo, to be able to have that live, co-constructed dialogue about, well, what are we working with here, what's important for the students to know, and how can we all be doing that as a team. Yeah, that's fantastic. So if you could dream big, I know you can dream big, but how would you like to see AAC integrated into education settings in the future? What might that look like?
I would want us to assume that every child, every student will have moments when they can't rely on their speech. And I think we already see that in classrooms every day with those kids who, the moment they're put on the spot unexpectedly, that's often the hardest time for them to actually show what they know. So my dream would be that we just assume that every person should have a toolbox of tools to communicate with. And that sometimes it'll be speech, sometimes it'll be an AC system, sometimes it'll be pen and paper, sometimes it'll be somewhere to type, but that we are just going to presume that for example, some topics are harder to talk about than others. So maybe for a certain topic, I actually want to pull back, use my visuals, be able to kind of construct something more spatially instead of having to say it all out in a sentence. You know, imagine being able to talk with your teacher about whether you feel safe in the classroom and what are the things that help you feel safe, or have a conversation with a partner about everything from like different kinds of touch to just how a comment made you feel, right? To be able to, if all of us were learning how to use multiple modalities to really get our message across the most, and our ordinary devices can give us that flexibility. My iPhone, my iPad can just give me the flexibility to choose the communication mode that's most powerful for me right now. That would be my dream, for schools to be preparing kids to be able to do that.
Yeah, oh, that's a powerful vision for the future. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this conversation. I hope you got out of it as much as I did. Thank you, Erin and David, for your time today and the valuable conversations that we've had. For those who signed up for this event, you can access the same link to watch this content anytime until April 17th. You can also share the registration link with your colleagues and others so they can also watch this session on demand. They'll get closed captions and Auslan version when they do. Just have them sign up via the same registration link for them to access the rebroadcast. Resources around this event are located in the resource section of your registration. If you select Manage Your Registration, link from the email, and then select the Resource tab, you'll get more information on Proloquo blog details, information on licensing, and more. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you again for your time.